Hi everyone, I'm the Tax Pro, and today I'm going to go over the new One Big Beautiful Bill, the part where there is no tax on tips. So, a lot of questions around this. Are tips tax free? Are there any situations in which tips may be taxed, and how does that work? So, I'm going to pull up the actual bill itself, and I'm going to go over this section of the bill. There are instances in which an individual could receive tips and there would be no tax on that. But there's also instances where an individual will receive tips and they will be taxed. So I'm going to go over what that looks like. This right here is the actual text of the bill. I'm going to go over the actual text so you can see where this information is coming from, because there's a lot of places where there's incorrect information. So I want you to see the actual bill itself. So this is chapter 2 of the bill, section 70201, and it says right here, no tax on tips. So let's kind of go over when that's true and when that's not true, because sometimes it's not true. Sometimes you're still going to have tips that are taxed or that are partially taxed. Okay, so right here, it's going to say, in general, there shall be allowed as a deduction an amount that is equal to the qualified tips received during the taxable year that are included on these statements. And so what this is saying is that generally you're going to be able to deduct your tips. However, we then move on to the limitations here. So what this means is you'll get the tips on your tax return and then you can deduct them. So they would come out before you would calculate your federal income tax. So right here are some limitations. So in general, the amount is going to be limited to $25,000. So if you get tips that are more than $25,000, you can't deduct all of them. Okay? So if you get $30,000 worth of tips, only $25,000 is deductible. So then there's also a limitation based on adjusted gross income. And adjusted gross income is going to be on your tax return. I'm going to show you where that lives. Okay, so right here is Form 1040. This is your individual income tax return. And adjusted gross income is going to be on line 11 right here. So line 11 is your adjusted gross income, or your AGI. And in order to get to that, we add all sorts of different income items up. So we have your W-2 on line 1A. We have tip income not reported on 1A. There's dividends. There's Social Security benefits, IRA distributions, capital gains or losses, additional income from Schedule 1, which is going to be business income. All that good stuff is going to go into your adjusted gross income. So there is now a limit based on this line 11 item, okay, this adjusted gross income. So in general, if your AGI exceeds certain amounts here, then this $25,000 that you can deduct, it's going to be decreased, okay? So if you are filing a tax return and you are filing as anything but married filing joint, if your AGI exceeds this $150,000, then for every $1,000 that it exceeds that, this $25,000 is reduced by 100. So what does that mean? That means if you make $155,000, that's your AGI as a single taxpayer, you're $5,000 over this 150 limit. So you're going to take $500 off this $25,000 deduction. So now the limit is $24,500. Okay? This amount goes up to $300,000 if you're filing a joint return. So it's this 150 times 2. So that's the adjusted gross income calculation. That's the limitation there. So to kind of summarize what we've gone over so far, in general, up to $25,000 of tips is deductible. Okay, so up to $25,000 is going to be tax-free. There's some limits. If you make higher income, then that amount is going to be reduced and eventually will be phased out. So once you get to a high enough income level, then there is no deductions. All your tips are taxable. Okay? Now there's some other items in here too that I want to cover. So tips received in the course of a trade or business is in here. So if you receive qualified tips as an individual during any taxable year, then those qualified tips can be taken into account. But notice this right here, only to the extent that the gross income for the taxpayer from such a trade or business for such taxable year exceeds the sum of the deductions. So what that means is your deduction for these tips cannot create a loss in your business. Okay? So it's not going to be able to create a loss for you. So if your net income, like your bottom line before you take into account this tip deduction, is $20,000, but you have $25,000 in tips, you can only deduct $20,000. Okay? And then it's going to give us a definition of qualified tips. So there's going to be some exclusion amounts here. So it's going to talk about, the amount needs to be paid voluntary and it's not the subject of negotiation and it's determined by the payer. So you as the individual receiving those tips, you're not determining what those tips should be. Okay? And then if this is received in the course of a trade or business, that business cannot be for a specified service. It's not a specified service, trade, or business, okay? If you're unsure what that is, that's kind of another topic. You would know if you're filing your tax return if this is a specified service, trade, or business, okay? So there's some limitations here that you're going to want to take a look at. There's some exclusions. It's also going to go into cash tips. It's going to go into information for married individuals. If the taxpayer is a married individual, this section shall apply only if the taxpayer and the taxpayer's spouse file a joint return for the year. Okay, so this whole deduction, if you don't file jointly with your spouse, according to this, you don't get that deduction. Now, I'm unsure if that will stay or if that will be modified, but as it stands right now, you have to file married filing joint if you are married in order to take advantage of this deduction. Another thing here is termination. No deduction shall be allowed under this section for any taxable year beginning after December 31st, 2028. What that means is starting in 2029, this tax break is going to go away. So it will no longer be there. There will be tax on tips at that point in time. There's some additional information here about qualified business income. I'm not going to go into all of this just because it starts getting a little tedious. But to summarize some kind of common questions that I see, is there really no tax on tips? In certain instances, taxpayers will not be taxed on their tips. The main limitations here are going to be that the tips don't exceed $25,000 and that the adjusted gross income is not over $150,000 for any taxpayers that are not filing married filing joint, or $300,000 for taxpayers filing married filing joint. Anything beyond that income, you start to reduce that deduction for the taxes. And then this $25,000 limit goes down. Okay? So if you have any questions, please let me know. If that was helpful, please consider giving us a like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.